Welcome to the Startup Grind.
First off, thanks everyone for coming out here. We're excited. We're excited to have Maria. And there's so many new faces here today, so that's really exciting as well. Startup Grind is a movement that started in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, I think, and it's since spread to 50 different cities and I think 20 different countries. And its goal is to educate, connect, and inspire entrepreneurs, which coincidentally is something Kansas City does very well in general. So we started the Kansas City chapter just in the new year, I think January, February. So myself and Dan Linhart and the Black Startup Grind Church, we co-organize this. Sometimes he's up here, sometimes I'm back there, and sometimes we flip it around. So that's kind of what it does. We do about monthly events. We bring in a local entrepreneur and just kind of talk about their journey, their successes, their failures. We're really intentional about choosing ones that are still in the midst of their journey, in the midst of their grind, not that's already at the top and is already calling it quits or anything. So it's all about that continuous grind that got you there and the grind that you're still going through. And so the format of this is really laid back, easy fireside chat style, but something that's really unique about it is an integrated Q&A. So we really encourage, anytime you have a question, please raise your hand at any moment. Don't shout it out in the middle of her talking, but raise your hand, and that really encourages an organic flow of the conversation. You're not holding your questions and forgetting them until the very end. So you're here for a reason, there's something that you want out of it, so we want to make sure that you get that out of it. So that's kind of how the format goes. We'll chat for about an hour. I've got a list of questions. Maria's got lots of amazing things to talk about. And then as we go through, you guys will have questions as well. So we'll fill up that hour pretty quickly. As a thank you to sponsors, we would like to thank Crumb Lab for hosting us and giving us food and beer. I'm in no way affiliated. I'm just kidding. Both Dan and I work here at Crumb Lab. So we're lucky enough to be able to use the space as well. And then also, just as a quick announcement, Lean Startup Machine at Kaufman is this weekend. And so our new friend Jim, he's got all the details about it. If you want to touch base with him, there's still some openings this weekend. So if you want to learn a little bit more about it, see how you can get involved, get your idea rocking, he's got details on that. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So just once again, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate. So without further ado, I want to present to you Maria Meyers. She is of KC and U.S.SourceLink, as well as the Director of Entrepreneurship at UMKC. And she is going to do a much more fantastic job of introducing herself and telling us how she got here than I am. So I'm going to go ahead and let her take it away.
Okay. So my most recent endeavor, I guess, is the SourceLink and the work for UMKC. So 10 years ago, I started at UMKC as the director of KCSourceLink, and at the time, SourceLink was a white piece of paper that said figure out a way to get entrepreneurs to the resources that they need. And I started out at UMKC and in a classroom. I had a teacher's desk and 32 student desks. I had no phone, no computer, and the mission of solving this small problem that we had in Kansas City. And that's how we started 10 years ago, last month, actually, back in June. I had 1 year of funding, and we were 6 months through that year when I took the job. Since then, I've done some fun things. KCSourceLink is a program of UMKC, so I'm a UMKC employee. I don't get any funding from UMKC, but I am a UMKC employee. And we have, since 10 years ago, launched SourceLinks in about 25 other regions in the country. One of our biggies last year was Dallas, so Dallas now has a SourceLink. And in September, we'll launch San Antonio. And we have many SourceLinks all over and in between, so it's been fun growing that. Also during my tenure at UMKC, I was the first managing director of the Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, so I actually did the startup. I wrote the business plan and helped hire the people and get the curriculum in play that became the Institute then after that, I helped them build the UMKC Innovation Center, which has in it the Small Business and Technology Development Center, the Procurement Technical Assistance Center, LFAS, which does SBIR, STTR stuff, all of the SourceLinks, associated programs, Whiteboard to Boardroom, and now Digital Sandbox KC, which is part of that as well. So had a lot of fun in the last 10 years working with resources for entrepreneurs and filling the gaps that we run into as we went. Today, KCSourceLink has about 205 organizations in that network right now. So we network together the organizations that support entrepreneurs. And in Kansas City, like I said, there's about 205. Across the country, we have close to 5,000 in our network now.
So, and we'll touch base a little bit more about KCSourceLink, what it is, and the resources that we have for it as well. But talk to us a little bit about how you got there. She has a very interesting background in astrophysics, and so that's quite a leap sometimes to entrepreneurship. So let's talk about how that happened.
Yes, I have to admit to the fact that I have a degree in astrophysics a long time ago, and that was really cool. I think when I was in college, first of all, I was the only girl in physics, and secondly, we'd go out. A different guy would pick me up every night, and we'd go out to the observatory and watch asteroids all so I think our neighbors thought I was probably in a different sort of business. No, I probably was, but I loved astrophysics because there's nothing that makes you feel so much more insignificant, or your problems seem so much smaller than when you're sitting there looking at the vastness of the universe. And there is nothing that expands your mind so much when you have to think about stuff that is so big and so far away, and you try to interpret what little bits of information you have into what's actually going on in this world that you can't touch or see or feel. And, I think people ask me, well, what did you learn doing that? And I have to say, stars live forever and people don't, and it's the people that are important. So, that's kind of one of the things that I learned. So after I graduated with that degree and found out there are only 1,700 jobs in the entire United States in that field, we decided that I needed to find something a bit more lucrative. So at the time, my husband was going to law school in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I said, well, I probably ought to get a job. And so I said, well, I'll go apply at the top 10 employers in Lincoln, Nebraska, and see if I can get a job. Well, 2 days later, I was invited in for an interview, and they said, hey, can you program? And I said, well, I know a little Fortran and they said, okay, well, take this aptitude test and let's see if you're any good at programming. So I took this aptitude test, and they said, yeah, I think you can program. We'll teach you how to do it. I said, okay. So within a week, I was learning COBOL, on a UNIVAC, if you ever have heard of that. So I got from Fortran an IBM computer where you have the cards, and this is the punch cards, and if you forget to put, see, some of you guys know what these are. If you forget to number your punch cards and you drop the deck, it's bad. So these guys remember that. So anyway, I'm in one of the largest employers in Lincoln, and I'm learning how to program COBOL, and so I ended up working with an insurance company there, and actually wrote a big system that the dental claims people use. So if you send in claims for your teeth, then you would they would be able to process the claim. So I know way more about teeth than how many you should have, and if you get them pulled twice, and you want to pull twice, believe me, that system figured it out. So I did that. I learned how to run big systems projects, and so we ended up moving to. My husband, when we graduated, got a job in Jefferson City, Missouri. Actually, worked for John Ashcroft when he was Attorney General, and so I showed up in Jeff City, Maria Meyers, traveling spouse. This was a theme. And I said, well, gee, what do I do? Well, I'll go apply to the biggest employer and see what happens. And so I ended up working for the state government for 6 months. I worked for what was then the Consumer Affairs Regulations and Licensing, and I programmed.
Not a mouthful.
Yeah, I programmed in a couple other languages there, and so I built the registration system for the real estate brokers and stuff, there, and then I was really interested in Westinghouse because it was the second biggest non-government employer. And so about 6 months into it, I ended up with a job there. And I programmed in a bunch of other languages and became a system engineer and actually did interesting things like link what then were the big networking systems together. And the other fun thing that we did there is back in the days when broadband was just being born, we actually automated the factory. So we had an IBM computer as the master. It would go down to a digital computer that was the middleware, and then
Is this V2NCP by any chance?
yeah. So and then we'd go down to ladder logic, and then so that you could design something on CAD, and then it would be automatically punched out on the machines down on the floor. And I love manufacturing because you have all this stuff that like comes together, and in the end, you paint a green and ship it. We used to do the CAD mounted transformers, right? And so a lot more computer programming, and I became manager there, and then husband got transferred to St. Louis. So Marie, my Irish Charlie spouse, showed up in St. Louis, and I said, well, what am I going to do here? Well, I had learned a lot about digital equipment computers, and so they said, well, why don't you come and you can be in a manufacturing office operation. That's all here. So I said, okay, fine. And about 18 months later, they said, hey, we want to move you to Kansas City so that you can run sales support, be part of the sales team there. So with digital, I was actually part of the sales team, and I learned a lot about selling and negotiating and all of that. And we ended up moving here. That would be Mark Sedlick, Charlie's spouse, to Kansas City. And after doing that for a while, I really had always wanted to do something in science, and there was this little science museum that they were going to build here called Science City at Union Station. So I became the project manager for that project and built the review of the Science City at Union Station. And after that, I worked for Birch Telecom in the telecom industry as they were growing, and then I did a Series A for a biotech company. We did gene therapy, drug research, and I know how to manufacture DNA, should you ever need to know how to do that. And for that particular position, I was working up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and my youngest one was going to be a senior in high school, and I wanted to be back here for that. So I sent an email to 3 people and said I'd really like to come back here and be working, because my 3 days a week for a month up in Lincoln, Nebraska turned into 18 months, 7 days a week, and I couldn't really live there. So I ended up getting the KCSourceLink job about 3 days later, and here I am. So what a trip, right? So I have a lot of project management, a lot of programming, I don't know, 9 or 13 different languages.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So you said you helped build the Science City. I didn't hear anything in your background about knowing about exhibitions, about how people travel, and all the things that you said are so varied. How did you pick up the industry knowledge so quickly? Did you rely on people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the skill that I ended up developing over time was really a project management skill, right? And so that kind of skill can be applied to many different things. So then it becomes understanding the industry or the underlying issue that you're trying to work on. And so, yeah, every time I switched industries, I had to learn that industry, but that was something I loved to do. And so, yes, when I moved into the museum industry, we built 3 theaters. We're in the restaurant business, bringing the restaurant in. We did restoration on a 750,000 square foot building, and I needed to know about ticketing systems systems and everything
But
else.
who did that? I mean, why did they say Maria could do it? Because that seems like they would want somebody specialized, at least on the team.
Well, the president of the museum had the experience of doing it, right? And when you build a project that big, you bring in a lot of consultants and a lot of people that do what you do. And I think that's something you have to learn, right? You can't do everything, right? But what I can do is say these are the activities that need to be done, and here's how we're going to get those activities done, right? So,
Out of curiosity, what do you think the financial troubles with Science City stem from? Was it a marketing problem or just operations?
A lot of the beginning business model for Union Station was based on attendance figures that were probably not realistic. But 3 different consultants gave us the same answer. So, but all is good now, I think.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about KCSourceLink, and let's begin, I guess, with the mission and purpose behind it.
So the purpose of KCSourceLink has always been to make it easy for entrepreneurs to find the resources that they need. And when we built it originally, we said rather than connecting together the entrepreneurs, what would happen if you connected together the support organizations? And how would you create some sort of cohesive network with the support organizations, and what is it that they need? So we started in 2003 in July at a meeting that we had about 50 different of these organizations together, and we said, what is it that, what can we do for you that would be value added in building a network like this? And they gave us 5 things. The first thing they said was, can you build awareness that we even exist? Because for a lot of the organizations, the funders didn't want them to spend the money on marketing. They wanted to spend it on programs. Well, if you can never spend money to tell anybody that you exist, it's difficult. So that was their biggest issue. The second thing that they wanted to know was, they said, we don't know what each other does. And so we would like to know better what we each do so that we can make better referrals. The third thing was, we'd like to know where the gaps are in services so that we could build better programming, build the programs that we're missing. The fourth thing is we'd like more money. and the fifth thing was, we need to know how to measure our impact, because the only way we're going to get more money is if we can prove to people that we can measure impact. And so SourceLink's mission became to make it easy for entrepreneurs to find the resources that they need, but also to create and strengthen a network of service providers by doing those things, raising awareness, finding the gaps, getting people to work together, helping define impact, and then also helping people find additional funding to get the jobs done.
I would love to spend a little bit of time talking about some of those resources provided not only by KCSourceLink but by UMKC. Marie and I sat down for a little bit a couple weeks ago, and somehow through the conversation she started telling me a little bit about some of them. I think we were talking about one of my side projects. I was like, I need help with this, and she's like, this resource is available, right? And it's free. So I'd love to just talk a little bit about every startup and entrepreneur here needs a lot of resources, and that usually equates to money that they don't feel that they have, or that they, literally don't have. And so to know that some of those are free and available is something that I would really love to get at. So
Sure.
rattle them off.
Okay. Well, there's 205, so if you got an hour, I can get to all of them. I think that there are, the way I look at it is every business is different, every industry is different, and we have resources in our community to support many different kinds of businesses and many different kinds of industries. And so when I look at the resources, I've been doing it long enough that I see them in different categories. So there's kind of a set of resources that support the tech business, whether it's bio or advanced manufacturing or technology based. And those resources know how to prepare you to pitch to an investor. Those businesses will be interested in equity There's a whole set of attorneys that work in that space, and you're generally going to find some of your research institutions very involved in that space as well. So there's a whole set of resources there. There's a whole set of resources that work with more the micro-enterprise groups of people, the people that are going to build a business but not take it. They may not want to have employees. They may not want to take it to a national level. They may want to just sell locally. They may be freelance, sole proprietor kinds of people. And there's another set of resources that kind of work with that group. There are also businesses that I kind of call second stage. They're the businesses that are at that point in time where they've got employees and they've got revenue and they're trying to take it to the next level. It's a little crazy. Their lives are a little crazy right now. And you'll see some strong mentoring programs, especially in that space, that will help them with that. And then there are like independent retailers and restaurateurs, and there's sort of another set that goes with that. So when you look at the 200, it looks massively difficult to understand, but to me, if I could break them into these little 4 quadrants, they make better sense to me. So there are groups on, the other thing that we have is the state line here, and so you'll often find what look to be duplicate things on either side of the state line. It's because of where their funding comes from. So I don't look at them as duplications. I say, yay, we get double what other people get because of the way that the funding rolls in. And you also will find that there are different incentives on either side of the state line. So you can get some things in Kansas that you can't get in Missouri, but oftentimes if you know you can get it in Kansas, you can talk somebody into Missouri on the Missouri side of doing it, except tax credits, okay, that's a problem. But so what are some of the resources? There's a lot of one-on-one counseling that's free, and there's a lot of training that is low cost. By law, our small business development centers have to provide free counseling, and they have to cover every county in the U.S. plus a bunch of other territories. And so you are always entitled to sit down with a small business development center counselor. On the Missouri side, UMKC SBTC is very good at counseling with any type of business, but they also have a focus in tech. And on the Kansas side, Johnson County Community College has a small business development center. They happen to have an expertise in franchising, as well as the other general counseling. So that's sort of interesting to know that even if there are a couple of different organizations that look the same, they may have different emphases. At UMKC, in the Innovation Center, we have a specialty in small business innovation research grants. So these are the only free government grants that I really know of. And if you have a technology that you want to commercialize and you haven't taken a look at seeing if you can get some small business innovation research grant funding, you definitely should look at it. And the way that works is all the federal agencies have a set aside of money, and they are looking for small businesses to take advantage of that funding. It is a grant. The phase ones are like $140,000. Unless you're in Homeland Security area, then it's like $750,000. But if you get into phase 2, then you can get millions of dollars to help commercialize your business. A lot of people don't know that that kind of funding exists. Again, it's going to be sort of a technology commercialization thing, and that's what it is. Another thing that we have at UMKC is a Procurement Technical Assistance Center. Procurement Technical Assistance Centers are part of a national network, and what they do is help people get government contracts. And so they know how to bid a government contract, and they know how to get the forms and certifications together to help you do that. The other thing that I think is really cool about our Procurement Technical Assistance Centers is that they have a bid matching service. So you can sign up, and your first 6 months are free, and I think after that it's like $5 a month. And you can get in your email the bids that are coming out of the federal government and some of the state and local governments that match what your keywords are. And so it just shows up, and you can see if you can bid on that. So that's something people don't know about. There's some really obscure resources. Oh, by the way, there's a PTAC at UMKC. There is a PTAC at Johnson County Community College. So there's some really obscure resources out there too that are sort of interesting. The Red Cross will help you build a disaster plan for your business. for free. And so it's something that people don't think about a lot, but it can be done. The Conservation Department from the state of Missouri will do OSHA inspections without being OSHA, so that you would know if OSHA came through what, there are 800 volunteer lawyers that are willing to work with you. It's actually through legal aid. There's a whole group to help with transaction businesses. And at UMKC, we have an entrepreneurial legal services clinic, and it is run by the law school, and there is a full-blown lawyer in charge of it, but they need work for students to do to get used to working with clients. And so they will help you do your LLC or a 501c3, and they will also review leases and contracts if you need that kind of support. They do it during semesters, so fall and winter semesters, fall and spring semesters. You can get that kind of help. So there's stuff that if you really dig for, it's interesting that you can find it. There's other people in the network that provide office equipment, that sort of used office equipment and things like that that would be worth looking at too. So there's a lot.
So what does it look like, and how do you find these resources? I mean, even on an ongoing basis, or even in a putting it together. How do you build relationships to say, hey, I need 800 free lawyers? Yeah, they call you.
What's your cell line? 800.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is there are national programs that come through that I know if I go into the next city, I'm going to find those, and I just need to know who they are, for instance. And then every city has their own support systems. I mean, we have Startup right here, for instance. And we have a database that's called the Resource Navigator, and you can get to it on our website. And all the stuff that we know about goes into that database. And you can actually answer some questions about your business, and it'll pull back the ones that will most likely help with the project you have. But we also have people on the phones, so you can call our hotline during the week, and we'll try to match you up with the right organization. The nice thing about having that hotline is when it comes up often enough and we don't have anywhere to send you, we know that there's a gap, and then we'll start working on how we can fill that gap. And an example of that is back in 2009, we lost our microloan program here, and we lost First Step Fund, which was our technical assistance for micro enterprises, especially in the urban core, and we lost the initiative for the competitive city, which was another resource for that. And so people would call us and say, here's the kind of business I am, and here's what I need, and here's where I am, and we had nowhere to send them. And so we brought together a group of resources and began a conversation about how do we bring a microloan program back here, and how do we get these resources back. It took us a few years, but we now have the microloan program back, and we now have the Kansas City Urban Business Growth Initiative that Rick and group have been working on as well. And so we've now brought back those resources to the community, which is great, because when people call you and you have nowhere to send them, it's really frustrating. And so we will do that as well.
What's your team look like?
What's our team look like?
What's your team look
My
like?
team look like?
Is it? Sometimes I feel like it's just you sometimes, but I know that there's support.
I have on the SourceLink side, we have about 6 full-time FTEs, about 6, and we run the entire country with that.
They run the country.
Yeah. Obama's he'll be around.
Yeah, right.
I told him I was in the Belleville tonight. So we do that, and then I have another 7 that do the other programs that pretty much. So there's about a dozen of us. Yeah.
And I think, and I could be wrong, but it does bring up the question, if I am wrong, but George might have been getting at, is actually how do you find the resources? So you lost the microloan, and then you had to have it back. Is there a vetting process? Like, what is it that makes that, those resources, the actual resources, as opposed to all possibilities?
So we have criteria that we've had really since day one. You need to be, if you're going to be a resource in our network, you need to be providing a direct service to the small business. So generally, somebody who provides phone service to a small business is not going to be it. It's going to be a service or a program that supports the development of the business. You have to be a valid company with a valid website or valid agency. We have to be able to verify that you're real. That you exist. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't really realize is that after somebody calls us and asks for help, 4 to 6 weeks later we call them back and we ask them how did it go? Did they get the help they wanted? Did we send them to the right place? How did it go? And so we actually get feedback not only on our support, but on the support of the resources that we send people to. And when generally we get about a 98% satisfactory or above. 2% of the time people are very unhappy. It's usually because they couldn't find anybody who would say that they could fund them. So the money thing becomes an issue. But sometimes it's we send them to the wrong place, or there was a really bad chemistry between whoever they talked to at that area. The one thing that has happened from time to time is they haven't been able to get a hold of the resource that we sent them to. And then we can call the resource and say what's going on. And generally they've lost a person, somebody's left, or there's a hole or something like that. But we actually track all of that. And so we've actually had resources call us and say, don't refer anybody to us for a while until we get our person back or whatever. And we also see our resources work really well together. Like there is really a path between when you go to SCORE and you work with them, and you may sort of graduate into a financing area or graduate into an SBDC or something like that. So there really is a little path through the network that people take, and we can kind of see that. We have stopped referring to maybe 1 or 2 organizations in the past 10 years because the satisfaction wasn't there, or they just never answered their phones or whatever. But those organizations are here. Yeah. So, for the most part, people that are in the network are very passionate about helping, and so they do as best a job as they can.
And do you find that particularly more regionally, like in the Midwest? Is it kind of harder to build those on more coastal areas or more dog areas, or there's a pretty good Midwest mentality of everyone's helping out everyone wants everyone to succeed, and that kind of starts to disintegrate as you go further out from it. So have you found that at all a challenge as we've expanded SourceLink?
I think the important thing in the expansion has been to find somebody who's considered collaborative, because if they're considered territorial or they don't collaborate, then it doesn't work. And so, generally across the country, we have university-run organizations. We have some chambers that run SourceLink, and then we have some government groups that run SourceLink. And for the most part, those groups tend to be considered neutral in an area, and so we don't really have a problem getting people to sign up. The one issue that we'll run into, and we run into it just about everywhere we go, is at first people say, "Oh, you come to take me out of business." So you'll talk to one of the people that would be part of the network, and you get this, "Oh, you come to take me out of business. You're going to find out we all do the same thing, and then you're going to shut one of us down, or you're going to take our funding or something like that." That's the biggest obstacle that we run into. But generally, what happens is in any given region, the funders don't tend to fund duplicate programs, and so you don't often find a lot of duplication. But if you do find duplication, you will also find gaps. And as soon as you tell the network, "Hey, here's where we think there are gaps," pretty much the people that are duplicating one of them will swap over to the gap. So that's how it works.
And aside from that obstacle, and then more Kansas City specifically at the beginning of SourceLink, what were the kind of small hurdles that you had in the first couple of years getting it off the ground? And then was there at any point something that made you really question what you were doing and made you think maybe this is going to work?
The obstacles that we had at the beginning, we never had anything big in Kansas City. I think one of the reasons that it worked well in Kansas City, and when we go do it in other regions, we talk to the funders and say, are you behind this? If Kaufman, when we started, Kaufman and UMKC, and there are a few other funders that were funding, and they were all behind it. The SBA, they were all behind it. And so when the funders of a nonprofit are behind it, the nonprofit tends to be there with you. But the biggest issues that we had were I did have a number of people that I sat across the table from to tell them about SourceLink, and they said, come and take it, because they were say that, where they felt that there would be competition. And once we got the resource navigator loaded and we could say, we don't have a lot of duplication of services, the whole system kind of went through a big deep sigh of relief, and it was fine. We started moving forward and doing some collaborative things together. The other thing that was really true in the beginning is that a lot of our organizations really didn't know what the next organization did. They really didn't. And all we did was, similar to 1 Million Cups, all we did was bring people together. And we just had, every other month we'd have a meeting. And some of them we do speed networking, and, some of them we just talk about stuff. And some of them, so we sort of had the 1 Million Cups for resource partners back then. And they just got to know each other. And it was amazing how every time we had a meeting, somebody would connect up with something good. What happened? Yeah.
Were there any other small wins kind of like that? Any other signs that you really feel like you were doing the right thing and you were on the right path?
I think that when we started KCSourceLink, within that first year, I wrote a business plan for it. And it's the first time I think a business plan that I've done actually did everything I said it might. So we knew that in order to be sustainable, we were going to have to find a method of bringing funding into SourceLink. And so we knew when we started that if we have to build something that was scalable, and probably our future would lie in being able to take it to another city. So if we would have proof of concept in Kansas City and then we can move it to some other city, that would be kind of a cool thing. So in my business plan, we started in 2003, and I said we would have one city. We would do one other city by the end of 2005 when we get to 2006. Well, we did 4 cities at the end of 2004. And so it was already at that point considered successful enough in Kansas City that 4 other cities were interested. And then by 2006, we had moved across the state of Kansas through Network Kansas. So Network Kansas is actually, we helped build out Network Kansas, and we helped hire Steve, we helped set that whole system up. And that was our first expansion statewide across another state. And then after that, it was just whatever funding.
I'm wildly fascinated by the resources and everything else. From your experience of seeing startups come through this, seeing people use the resources you have available, you following up with them, what are some of the top things that you say, everyone must do this? I mean, I feel like you're a gold mine for that because you're seeing all facets of different types of businesses for them.
So what we find is if you're a startup business, you will call asking for 3 things. You want to know how to do a business plan. You need help understanding what the market might be. And there's a lot of issues around financing and how to manage financials. So almost every time somebody who's in the concept phase calls, it's those 3 things. Almost every time. Once a company is in business and they get further down the path for that revenue coming in, the bigger issues that we get at that point are market shift. The market has shifted. I have a competitor that's moved in next door. We're in the middle of a big recession. How do I what do I do, you know, on the market side. So we'll see that. HR becomes significant issues as they grow, and legal. So those three things show up as you get more of an established business. But the other thing then on the established businesses, and then it's everywhere, and then you get all kinds of questions. I need a retail space, or I need to move. I need to know what the licenses and permits are in this other city. I need. It's everywhere. It's just everywhere. So if you look at our little chart of who comes in, so you get this big blip here of all the concept people that are in those three areas, and then it sits down and this long line of lots of different things, and then you get a blip on HR, and you get a blip on marketing, and you get a blip on legal, and then there's a whole tail of everything else. So they'll call about disaster planning, or they'll call about whatever the issue is. And the other difference is that when people are in the concept phase, they seem to have wonderful amounts of time, right? I can take a training class, I can write a business plan, I can learn this. But when they're in business, it's like, I need to solve today, and you've got to get me help today. And so there's a big sense of urgency change as they become more established in the call.
So along those lines, just to kind of follow up on that, so there may or may not be people in the room, including us, that are in the early stages of kind of growth, and figuring out what are those maybe secret sauces that we should be looking at. So is it that thing of making sure you have a good legal resource, making sure that you have a good business plan written? Is that what we need to make sure are locked down to see a better chance of success?
Yeah, but there are also some resources that, when you're in that sort of stage, are great too.
Right.
And there are things like there's a fast track growth venture class, for instance. And I think what happens, and I do this myself because I'm in that stage too, I get so busy just trying to do what's best that I don't step back and go, what strategically should I be doing, right? And so taking the time out to do something like that helps. Also, there's some great mentoring programs like the Hellsberg Entrepreneurial Mentoring Program, where you get advisors that can help you through some of those issues, and are people that have been through it before. So I think that you see some good programming like that. But a lot of it is about listening to your business, about really stepping back and doing that. And I think we see people doing more peer mentoring. We see more mentoring that comes into play at that stage, at looking for people that have done it before. Yeah.
Maria, along the lines of what George was talking about, knowing what resources people go first in the various stages of their business, do you offer any feedback of the feedback? And both of us are in the marketing research business. You collect the metrics for everything that somebody comes to the site or somebody calls. Do you offer any of that information back to the community?
To the community, or if we get feedback on a particular resource and it's not good feedback, we'll call the resource and let them know that that's happened. So, and we don't get that very often, but we will do that. And we have seen some resources actually restructure a little bit to get their feedback better, and that's happened over the years as well. As far as the feedback to the community, we can provide whatever information that we can. I mean, what we are measuring right now from the SourceLink perspective are things like satisfaction to see what we get. And like I said, it's like 98%. And that's in our, we do a little annual report you can find on our website. But we also measure, how far are we reaching? What do we see as gaps, and how can we fill those gaps? Those kinds of things.
It seems like you're in a perfect position because you see so many people and so many stages that you're in a perfect position to write a white paper on business in general, and how to start a business, what to look out for, where to go, and that kind of things. Do you guys provide anything like that?
What we provide is a path
Yeah.
to the other resources. And so if somebody calls and says, I want to start a particular kind of business, we'll say, well, you probably need to start here.
Okay.
And usually it's going to be at SCORE or an SBDC, something
Sure.
general, or it may be a fast track class, or it may be something like that, that gets them started. And then often they'll come back and say, okay, I did this now. Yeah, now where do I And we are working on pictures of paths that you
Yes.
can take. Yeah, and those will be up on our website in September, October.
Oh, yeah, there might not be a set answer to this, but you mentioned the HR issues. Are there any particular HR issues that show up a lot when they ask, and if you can flush those out?
Okay, so the way I put it is, you can hire your first 5 people and then you're done hiring your friends. So then you start having to really manage people, and the issues that come up often are how do I fire somebody without getting in trouble? So we will get that one. But often too, it's on the how do I hire somebody that I don't know, and how do I, make sure that I'm hiring the right person. We'll also get, as businesses get established, what's a personnel manual look like? How do I motivate people? And what can I do from a leadership perspective to make sure that my team works well together? So we'll get that. So, you get the sort of mechanical stuff, hiring, firing, and personnel issues, general personnel issues, and then you get leadership issues. That's it.
Could you speak to innovation and education? So you mentioned the W2Me
Right.
program earlier, how, given your position, how universities are working together, gaps.
Okay, sure. I did a study once and looked at how many entrepreneurship classes were being taught in our schools. And if I remember right, in 1987, across the whole country, there were 3.
Wow.
Okay, and so entrepreneurship was not taught in our universities until about 15 years ago. And today, we have some 2,000 universities that are teaching entrepreneurship. So even when you looked in the 1990s, the number of universities and colleges teaching entrepreneurship was pretty much 0. And so you had Babson and you had a couple of them. So what happened was entrepreneurship was not considered an approved field, right? And so there were no professors that had entrepreneurship degrees, and there were no classes being taught in entrepreneurship. Well, in the last 10 years, of course, we've had a complete change in that. And so there are many, many, many entrepreneurship degrees out there now, and many of our universities are teaching entrepreneurship. But it's really only been in the last probably 5 or 6 years that we've seen true graduates with entrepreneurship degrees, okay? And so that's a big, big change in what's happening. So entrepreneurship is becoming a mainstream field of study now in universities, and it was not that even in 2000, okay? So that's a huge change in the way that universities are working. Another dynamic that's happening in the world of universities today, partly because of pressure due from the federal government, is that they are research institutions, and they're getting pressured to commercialize that research much more today than they have in the past. And so what the desire is to get universities to take what's in their labs and get it out into the market, and triggering that research money that gets spent on things that can be commercialized. So that it's not true across the board, because universities do what's called basic science research or basic research as well. So that research might be on a cell, so you can figure out how the cell works, because you'll never fix cancer if you don't figure out, how the cell works. So there's still a lot of research on that, and that stuff is so far away from commercialization, but it's your basic research. But there's a lot of applied research that's going on, especially in our engineering schools, and how do we get that out into the community? So I think what we're going to see is that in the last 10 years, the business schools have picked up entrepreneurship degrees, and you can now go through the business schools and get entrepreneurship degrees. But I think where we're going to see a lot of interesting dynamics is actually going to be in the bio schools and the engineering schools around entrepreneurship, because that's where the products get developed. And so if you can get that business entrepreneurship on top of that, I think we'll get that shift in driving product out of the universities.
Right. And so I mentioned the WTB specifically because they included William Jewell,
Right.
a non-research
Right.
engineering school.
Right.
So how do schools like that, or Rockhurst, or liberal arts schools, fit into the innovation or entrepreneurship?
Okay, so he's talking about W2B is Whiteboard to Boardroom program. We started that to fix a gap in the marketplace. Our universities, we didn't see our university researchers playing in the entrepreneurial space. So what do we do to take a look at our universities and pull it out? Also, we don't have Stanford or MIT here, so we're not generating $300, $400 million, $1 billion worth of research here. So we said, okay, what if we took UMKC, William Jewell, Johnson County Community College, and KU, because they've done this, and see, how do these kinds of universities play in this innovation space? And is there anything we can do collectively to make that happen? So Whiteboard to Boardroom started as this collaboration between those 4 schools. It now includes St. Luke's Innovation Center, KC, University of Medicine and Biosciences, Rutgers just signed up, MRI, a number of groups that do research, Children's Mercy, they're all a part of this now. And what's happened is we've taken the technologies that are close to commercialization and now have that standard list of who they are, and we're actively matching them to entrepreneurs. So one of these technologies is the technology that iVerify uses that came out of the UMKC laboratory. That technology rolled out from the Whiteboard to Boardroom project. We've started 8 companies now in the last 18 months on university and research technologies, and we're hoping that our large corporations are going to also hop in with some of the technologies that aren't their core business, but they may have it. We can develop. And so the reason that works here is that we have to collaborate amongst lots of groups to get the critical mass that other people like Stanford or MIT might have in one organization. And so and what happens with a Rockhurst or a Jewell, their IP policies are different than your research universities, but their professors are still working on things. And so we've had technologies from professors at like William Jewell that are in the process. They're just owned differently than the ones are in UMKC. But also, all of those schools are now training for entrepreneurship. And so how do we utilize the talent that's coming out of those schools to work in the companies that get developed? So that's how that works.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit, go on a more personal level.
Favorite color?
Favorite color.
Not that. That's not my question. What is something throughout your professional career that you're most proud of, that you really got a lot of pride in accomplishing? And on the same respect, maybe a failure that you learned a great lesson from that you might want to share?
I think probably the biggest accomplishment, or the thing that I'm most proud of right now, is that the team that I work with today is a high performance. And I think that being able to say, hey, I built this amazing team of very few people that get an awful lot done just in the group that I work with at UMKC is something that delights me every day. Because anybody who is a manager of anybody, that if you've got personality issues and if you've got people issues, it's so unproductive. And I'm lucky to have built a team that is so high performing that it's exciting. So that's one. The biggest disappointment, I think, probably attendance on Science City the first year. That was kind of disappointing. So, but
Science City is awesome. I think my daughter like all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
no. I think it's been, you know, when we built that particular project, Crossroads didn't exist the way it is today. Lydia's was just being built. The IRS wasn't there. And so for me to see all of this stuff build up around that and see that project become successful is really, it's really nice to see. That was a project that I learned a lot from, you know, and as that project ended, my son was in a bad car accident, and my mother was declared terminal. And by the way, that was my birthday. And so, you know, you reflect on a lot of stuff. And I was helping, I take some time off with my son at the time. And I remember writing down 10 things, you know, in the future, if I ever do anything, and again, this big, you know, here are the, you know, the 10 things. And some of those things, you know, there is very much truth to it's not what you know, it's who you know, and that was one of the things I wrote down. It really is who you know. So building that social network is so important. But I think being open to opportunity was another one of those, you know, that you never know who you're going to meet tomorrow or who you're going to meet, that opportunity is going to be there for you. So, you know, I learned a lot, you know, from doing that. That was a pretty intense project to pull that off.
Maria, can you talk a bit about the digital sandbox and how city corporations now are starting to recognize entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the cool things about what's gone on is, you know, we started this in 2003, and for 7 years we kind of felt like we were out there on our own, you know, and then 3 years ago things started to change here, and so it's really exciting. And one of the sort of the way SourceLink started is we got the entrepreneurial support organizations together and connected them to the entrepreneurs, and we got the university researchers connected in through Whiteboard the Boardroom, and then we noticed, well, where are the corporations? You know, how do we bring them into this? And so we knew we were missing two things. One was proof of concept funding. There wasn't anything, if you weren't far along, there wasn't any funding, but also how do we get the large corporations to play in this space? And when we got the group together to go after that digital sandbox grant to try to make that happen, we went out and reached out to people like Sprint and BML, UMB, Hallmark, Cerner, and said, how could you play in this? And they said, well, we could do this, we could provide some mentoring, or we could help with equipment, or we could help with lots of different things. And we got them to give us a lot of time as part of this project. And it was the first time that we were really engaging the corporations. And a little bit of it is like everything else we do. It's like you start out and you feel a little bit like you're walking through mud as you try to find your way in this new environment where you've mashed these people together. And I remember the first meeting we had on Digital Sandbox, we have the CTOs of those organizations, and we got them all in a room to talk about what they could do, and they hadn't met each other, and so that tells you a lot about where we're starting with that project, where even our across the big corporations, they don't know each other, and so then trying to work with them here is interesting. But I think Digital Sandbox has taught us a lot about working with the bigger organizations, and we're seeing groups like Sprint, like Cerner, really step up and get involved, and they're looking for more ways to get involved. They've been great for industry expertise, technology, evaluation so far, and they've been wonderful at they're starting to bring small groups of people together so that for instance, we have in Digital Sandbox, and here in Kansas City we have Handprint, which is a 3D printer solution group, and that stuff is so far out in the future that you've got to kind of talk peak to peak to talk about it even. Well, we were able to take them over to Hallmark and their 3D printing group, and they can sit down and have a conversation about what's going on. And I think our large corporations know where the industry's going, and they've got people that are trained can afford to go to conferences and stuff like that. If we can just share that, that's going to be amazing. And we're also beginning to see groups, especially like Sprint, investing in some of the work that's being done here. So that's pretty exciting. But we're just at the beginning of that too.
Your son's background, and opposed to more paper-based research or study-based research, do you ever get to do any actual physical, scientific, and method-based research on entrepreneurship, or is it mostly just database?
So we, when we started KCSourceLink, one of the things that the organizations said was we'd like to be able to track economic impact. And so nobody had a database that could do that or a system that could do that other than the SBA funded groups. And that system was so expensive, even you couldn't touch it. And so we got 15 organizations together and we actually built a product called BizTracker. And that product tracks data about businesses. And at the time, we pulled in researchers from UMKC and E.J. Reedy from Kauffman and Frank Lincoln from Mark, the big researchers, and said, what should we collect? What should we do? And they all said, we're not sure. I mean, we didn't know he was doing this, right? And so they said, just collect stuff. And in a few years, we'll look and see what you have and what you can kind of do with it. So nobody could say this is what you need to do. And now we have 10 years of data sitting in the database, and we actually have some people probably looking at what we have and to see what kind of information there is. But one of the things that we would like to do in partnership with the Civic Council and a couple other things is actually put together an index that says, how do you tell if an entrepreneurial ecosystem is actually moving forward? And things that we think we could measure would be entrepreneurial density, how many are there, what zip codes are they in, how many small businesses get developed. The financing, the whole financing thing, we have this, the investors say there's plenty of money, the entrepreneurs say there's no money, and there doesn't seem to be any way to figure out whether anybody's getting funded. So to really find out if we can systematically do that, that's another thing that we'd like to take a look at. There's something around sort of network density and who's using the network, who's not using the network, and those kinds of things that we'd sort of like to look at. There's also a component of place-based entrepreneurship. I mean, there's a reason Startup Village is working, and there's a reason Crossroads is working. But if you look at our city, those are walkable places, right? And so there's probably being a walkable environment may be an indicator of whether you're going to get an entrepreneurship cluster there or not. So those are things that we will probably be investigating in the next few years. So that's about as close as I get to research on that. Yeah.
Maria, we talked about this a couple of times, but I'd like your opinion on it. My contention is that there's two things happening in Kansas City. One is that we're before, on, or after the tipping point of entrepreneurism, startupism, and the other is that we're not unlike many other major cities that I think you said it earlier tonight, which was kind of a craze. Can you speak to that, what your opinion is?
Yeah. So I think that there has been a cultural shift as far as this tipping point goes, and I think it's worldwide. I don't think it's just Kansas City, but I think there's been a shift where traditional economic development has been about attraction and retention, and I think entrepreneurship will now always be a part of economic development. And that's a shift across the globe when I look at the work that we've done in other places. So I think the whole world has tipped. But I also think we're only at the beginning of what can be done. And so I also think that the momentum in Kansas City has tipped as well. What will be interesting to see is that we're still sitting under the effects of slow job growth after a recession. And this is my third recession since I started KCSourceLink. And I'm not causing them, really. And we know that during the recession periods, our phone calls go up. Okay? And we know that as soon as the unemployment rate drops, our phone calls go down. So what will be interesting is if we get job recovery, and we're getting some of that now, to see whether there's still an emphasis in the entrepreneurship space. The other issue, though, I think there's another dynamic that has occurred, and that is that we are teaching entrepreneurship in our schools, and that our young people are getting married later in life. And there's a period of time in there that primes itself for building for entrepreneurship to get to a much younger demographic than we've seen in the past. Because our average entrepreneur age in the past has been in the 40s. And I think that we're going to see a shift. I think that's going to shift down a little bit. And I think that will cause a cultural shift as well that will continue. So it will be interesting to see, as jobs recover and how they recover. The other thing is that it's not just Kansas City. It's in a lot of cities. St. Louis is doing almost the same thing that we're doing. Des Moines is doing some interesting things. There are a lot of cities that are really becoming interested in entrepreneurship, but there's a high demand right now for people who know how to program. Did I say 8 to 9 language? I can't know. Yeah. So I mean, there's because of there's been a shift in IT as well in the last 5 years, cloud-based. So you don't have to buy a server. You can have the capacity to build an IT system. The information that's readily available on the internet to make things happen. That's really, in the last 5 years has just come through. So there have been some shifts in that whole dynamic around what it takes to start an IT company, and so that's a change too.
So as a follow-up to that, is the stated Kansas City goal of being the entrepreneurial capital of the U.S. a possibility? Are we under an illusion? How close are we?
Well, I almost like to take that. That's actually a question I specifically asked Maria as well when we met before, and when I had planned that. I mean, that's a huge goal we have in the city, right? And it's something that she had said as a goal of KCSourceLink as well. And my question in tune to that had been specifically, what's the goal if you can't measure it? So how do you measure that specific thing? And through those measurements, is it attainable?
So can you, what does it mean to be America's most entrepreneurial city? I think Kansas City stands a chance of hitting that mark before other people do, because it's totally unexpected for Kansas City to do it. And so anything that we do is news, right? And so, they're going to expect it to be Austin or LA or something like that. But we're already, when I'm traveling now, I'm hearing, wow, what are you guys doing in Kansas City? So sometimes, perception is the reality of, the world. But when you if you look at Kansas City and you look at the big businesses that we have here that grew up here, we have 13 different category leaders, right? So if you go to Austin, they've got a whole lot of IT, right?
Okay.
We have YRC, we have Kansas City Southern, we have Hallmark, we have DST, we have Sprint, we have Garmin, those are all different industries. And so the interesting thing about Kansas City is that for some reason, it's not as, it's very diverse in the industries that it will support in their growth. And I think that's one of the things that can make us do it, because we can do it in lots of different industries as opposed to just one. And that the other thing that you have when you want to be America's most entrepreneurial city, the real issue is talent. Okay, so you have to have an environment that's going to drive talent. Now I know we don't have beaches and we don't have mountains, but we do have a good art scene. What we're going to have to do is drive the cultural amenities that are going to make people want to live here. So it's pretty funny how I can talk all about getting more money in the proof of concept funds and more money in the angels and more money from the investors. But in reality, we have to get talent to live here because it's not about businesses anymore. It's about talent. And so that's your competition, right? And so you've got to be a better place to live than St. Louis, and then we'll be America's most entrepreneurial city, right? And so it's a whole bigger cycle to me.
And can you talk about when we talked the 5 measurements?
Yeah, and so and some of that is around that dashboard, which is, can we measure the density? Are we getting more new companies that are developing here than you would see, and are they developing in different industries by different kinds of people? The second one is, do we have the financing we need to do this? And we already know we're probably short in the $500,000 to $3 million funding rounds, so we've got to fix that. We need to, we can take a look at the social networking that goes on and if that's improving, especially we know our deal makers are not connected. So we know our deal makers we know our investors they don't know each other and they're not collaborating on investments. So there's a place that we could actually measure, is that getting better? We can measure, are we nailing the investments that we expect to see? We can measure that. We can measure entrepreneurial density. So we can measure the number of 500 companies we have, and we can actually measure fairly readily the STEM team that's here. And we can measure the number, STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math talent. But we can also measure the number of STEM job openings that we have, and how those get filled over time. So you would want to keep those jobs filling, and you can measure that. And you can see if you can measure talent that way. So that just my.
Wow. Are you going to do all that?
Sure. How many years do I get?
Maria, you mentioned early on that when you started KCSourceLink, the emphasis wasn't on promotion, it was on programming, right? Is there anything we can do as a group here? I'm taking the luster away from George. But is there anything we can do to help promote what KCSourceLink
That's not
does?
a question for I'm just kidding.
It is Wednesday.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, we have more than 100,000 people on our website, every year. We had 7,000 people in 1 month, and yet we still run into people who've never heard of KCSourceLink, for instance. And so just telling your friends would be really helpful. I think that our media is starting to pay more attention to entrepreneurship in general. And I still think we have a long way to go on telling the story. And, things that it's kind of silly, but we don't have people that just sit around and write the stories. And so anybody who wants to write the story of what they're doing and send it in so that we can spread it around, that would be great, because, it's really all about you guys. It's all about the stories of the entrepreneurs and what they're doing. And people are very interested in hearing those stories.
So you're in the business of connecting people with resources. When someone comes to you saying, I can't find the talent, where do you direct them? Like, what are your targets in Kansas City?
I probably get every other day somebody that's looking for a job, and other people that say, here's a job. I have a job open. So we do some of that. But the Full Employment Council on the Missouri side and Workforce Partnership on the Kansas side do have lists of people who are looking for work. And there are, you can find chemists in that group, you can find programmers in that group. So there are some places to go to look for that help. If you're looking for help in your own business, you can also utilize, like UMKC has the Brew Network, which is their online system for connecting with jobs and people. So a lot of people who graduated from UMKC or even are still going to UMKC have their resumes out there. You can ping them and look for the talent. You can also So, and that's just UMKC, so any one of our colleges, you can go directly to the college and see if you can find talent that you need. I think that we're finding that our larger corporations are really working on the environment. You know, it's great that Suriname has a soccer team and those kinds of things, so that's helpful for driving talent here as well.
Just to be, sorry, I know we could go on forever. Just to be respectful of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We have one final question that we always end with. But we typically continue hanging out for a little bit longer. We usually stay around like 9:30. So I think Maria will be here for a little bit longer for you to ask any more of the questions that you have. But just, again, respectful of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this session of it. So just as our kind of final last question, I mean, like you said, KCSourceLink just celebrated its 10 years. Not just with them and UMKC, but in general for yourself, how much longer do you plan to grind it out?
So I have a tendency to work on stuff while it's still interesting to me. And so the thing about where we all are today in entrepreneurship is it's like brand new and exciting, and there's so many different, you know, directions to go with it that I think I can play with this for quite a while. You know, it's there's so, you know, you can, you know, clearly see some big gaps, and I would love to be able to get that dashboard built, and I would love to solve some of these financing issues that, you know, that we have. That's the kind of stuff that gets me excited about stuff. So until all that's fixed, I guess I'll be doing this for a while. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone, and like I said, feel free to hang out, snack on some food for a little bit longer. But we're done with this section. So again, thanks again. We should have another event probably in about a month or so. So keep your eyes out, and then just